join us, and it's an interesting case. Jacob will give you a more well-informed rundown, but long story short, this is essentially about a forced marriage case with Gavin Potter, who's one of a key player in Scientology. And then I'll throw it over to Jacob, and yeah, give me a rundown of this case.
Sure. So yeah, as a reminder of the case that we're talking about, we attended a hearing today in the Jane Doe v. Religious Technology Center case. And this case was filed toward the end of 22 by Jane Doe. Jane Doe is an ex-Scientologist and ex-Sea Org member who joined Scientology's Sea Organization, which is its internal clergy of members who work 365 days a year and live and eat communally. She was recruited into the Sea Organization by Gavin Potter, and while she was a teenager, Gavin Potter essayed her. Following the essay, Jane Doe reported her experience to the church, and the church gave them an ultimatum that they could either go to the RPF, the Rehabilitation Project Force, which is Scientology's labor camp, where Sea Org members that have fallen out of favor go to get back in Scientology's good graces, or her other option was to get married. That is what they ended up doing. So now Jane Doe is suing on grounds of child sexual assault, as well as other causes of action. And today, to give a little bit of context for what today's hearing was about, today was a case management conference, and today was actually our first day that we got to see the new judge, Kevin Brazil, in action. So some recent developments that have occurred over the last several months with the previous judge. The previous judge's name was Judge Robert Broadbelt, and Judge Robert Broadbelt had made some interesting rulings.
It's a bummer we lost him.
It is.
Unsurprisingly, though. And of course, unsurprisingly, it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was on Miscavige's side that requested this new judge.
That's correct. So essentially, there was a hearing in April on the motion to compel arbitration, because essentially in any case, in recent years especially, that has been filed against the Church of Scientology by an ex-Scientologist, Scientology will pull out the arbitration contracts that the ex-Scientologists signed while they were in, stating that they'll never sue the church and they'll take any grievances that they have with the church into Scientology's internal religious arbitration, which is really not an arbitration process at all, because the Church of Scientology has all of the odds stacked against it. And just to mention that, of course, in another well-known case, Valerie Haney is doing that, and she's even described the arbitration process, of which they'll yell at her, pressure her, deprive her of her rights. So even if there is arbitration, that's the arbitration. It's not even the way a Catholic church would do an arbitration or anything else. It's even non-religious, ironically. Indeed. But it did appear that there was going to be a big development in this case, because the day before the hearing was scheduled in April, Judge Broadbelt published a tentative ruling where he mentioned that he was intending to rule against the defense, and he was intending not to grant the motion to compel arbitration on a few grounds. One, that the document was unconscionable that she signed. She didn't have an adequate opportunity to know what she was signing into. And also because it's a case involving forced arbitration in a case of child SA, and there is a recent federal law that prohibits forced arbitration in cases of child SA.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
so,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it did appear that the judge was going to rule in the plaintiff's favor, ruling against the defense. However, like Dodge mentioned, that morning, the morning of the scheduled hearing, David Miscavige, who's the leader of Scientology and also one of the defendants in this case, filed a peremptory challenge to have Judge Broadbelt removed from the case. And because that was David Miscavige's first general appearance in the case, Judge Broadbelt found that David Miscavige was acting within his rights, and therefore he had to excuse himself from the case. So there was another hearing scheduled a few weeks ago in this case that ended up being continued. So we didn't get to see Judge Brazil at that point. Today was our first time getting to see Judge Brazil. So as far as what happened in the courtroom today, the reality is we got another continuance. Today's hearing.
We thought maybe there'd be some tangible court dates set, but that did not happen.
Trial dates. Yeah, I was thinking that my understanding was at that last scheduled hearing that happened a few weeks ago, The hearing itself did not end up happening, but the attorneys for both sides were present in the courtroom, and the clerk mentioned something, if I understood correctly, that at the next hearing that was being continued to July 16th, which is today, that we would get to hear about trial dates. But alas, that did not happen today. But there was a bit of conversation between the attorneys so John Kucera was present for Jane Doe in the courtroom.
And then Miscavige had an entire army. So Miscavige had 8 people on his side with, if I'm not mistaken, 5 the whole team. Miscavige had 2 attorneys. The whole team had 5, if I'm not mistaken. So they're pulling out all the stops.
So the attorneys that were present in court today, William Foreman was there for Church of Scientology International, as well as Bridge Publications Incorporated. And Bridge Publications Incorporated is the specific branch of the Sea Org that Gavin Potter held a position at. Right. We also had Matthew Hanks and Robert Mangels present for Religious Technology Center. And then there was Daniel Reback present virtually for Gavin Potter. And then there was Jeffrey Riffer, who I've seen before. Right. Jeffrey Riffer was there for David Miscavige. And then there was another attorney who I had not seen in person before, and that is Alex Weingarten. And Alex Weingarten is a name that I recognized because he represented James Spears in the Britney Spears conservatorship case. So I found that interesting to see him in person. That's a name that I've heard a lot, but I hadn't seen him in the courtroom before.
I'm curious if this is one of the more high-profile attorneys since Tom Mesereau was repping Danny Masterson for a quick minute, obviously in his case, and he previously represented Michael Jackson. I'm curious because you know so much about their history. Does Scientology have a history of hiring these attorneys who have been involved in these famous cases?
I mean, Scientology definitely has a history of hiring attorneys who cost a lot of money and who have a good track record, so it's not too surprising to me.
And another thing I want to ask you about, just to continue before you go on, is might it make them look not great if they have a well-known attorney who is involved with Jamie Spears, who obviously people see as the bad guy? Does it kind of create this feeling that the attorneys that they hire are always on the sides of the bad guys? I wonder if that creates some negative press, or perhaps down the road might it create some negative attention. At least the press was saying, oh, this is really interesting. What is the Jamie Spears attorney doing now? So I wonder if they shoot themselves in the foot with hiring these attorneys who have been on the wrong side of high-profile cases.
Well, I guess it just would depend on who you ask for that one.
Sure,
yeah, because
right,
I don't know that that's something that the church themselves will take into big consideration.
Right, but it might make them look bad. Right.
You're not wrong. I totally see what you mean. I felt similarly about them hiring Sean Hawley in the Danny Masterson criminal case when she had represented OJ.
Right. That's quite a credential.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. Forgot about that. Yes. So there's a theme here, which is they never seem to get people on the right side of things, which is kind of interesting, although some people think OJ's innocent, so that's your call. But yes, so interesting. So everybody was there. Alex Weingarten, really interesting history. And then, you found a bunch of other interesting nuggets, which are, and Jacob just looked at all of this in the computer, so credit to Jacob for finding all these hidden gems.
Well, thank you. Yeah, as far as what actually happened in the courtroom today, everything was continued. So October 10th is the next scheduled hearing, and at the October 10th hearing, I expect that we'll hear the judge and attorneys be able to respond to some additional filings that have been made over the last couple of weeks. So after we got out of the courtroom, because there weren't too many interesting developments from the actual court hearing today itself, but after the hearing was over, Dodge and I went down to the first floor of the courthouse so that we could just look up the case and look at what some of the recent filings were. And we found some interesting stuff. So one, there is a declaration which was recently filed by the defense in this case, and the declaration is by Jane Doe's mother.
Yeah,
and
bizarre.
It goes on and on about the fact that Jane Doe is just repeatedly lying. Her complaint is filled with lies, that while she was in Scientology, Jane Doe never complained about any coercion from her husband. And of course, if she did, she could have been written up for that. And so the fact that she didn't talk much about it while she was in if you understand Scientology, I think you'll understand that that's not necessarily proof that
But
abuse wasn't taking place.
Important point of information too, which is fascinating about that, is in one of the declarations, on Scientology side and Potter's side, they denied the fact that RPF was used as a threat against one of this Jane Doe's. They said that never happened, and that sort of is a lot of the crux of this case. So that's probably going to be a big topic of debate, I'd imagine.
I'm sure, because that's where the big allegation of coercion comes from, is the fact that she was not just willingly marrying him because they loved each other, which is what Gavin Potter says in one of his declarations, but in fact, there was an ultimatum of either go to the RPF or get married. Now, so that was one declaration that we found, was from Jane Doe's mother, who is still in Scientology. Now, there was also a motion for... what was it called? I'm trying to remember exactly what the document was called, but there was also a motion for order to substitute her true name.
Yes,
so essentially,
that was bizarre.
Right now, Jane Doe is going by Jane Doe in this lawsuit. She's not using her full name as a victim of SA, which she is.
Makes sense.
She has every right to do that. I totally understand that. Gavin Potter is pointing out that his name is being used when he didn't agree to, so he filed a motion of order. Sorry, I keep blanking on what
order show cause.
Yeah, motion for order to substitute her true name.
Substitute name.
And that declaration includes that motion includes declarations from Daniel Reback, his attorney, from Gavin Potter himself, as well as from Jane Doe's second husband, Greg Segroy.
Right.
Now,
Segroy doing an attack.
All of them are essentially telling the same story.
Scientology.
Yeah,
right.
They're all still in Scientology, and they're all telling the same story, that Jane Doe was never abused, that Jane Doe willingly married Gavin Potter because they were in love.
Right. Here's what I'm curious about: has Potter denied? It seems like and I have some quotes. Do they both agree that there was abuse before the marriage, or it seems like Potter is denying that?
There were some disputes put forward by Gavin Potter about exactly what took place before they were married.
Neither of them mutually agree on that. And that's an interesting thing that I want to talk about, because another thing that might come up, which we're not thinking about necessarily as much, is that Potter could potentially, is most likely, if you analyze this, is probably a predator and began relations with this. It's entirely possible he began relations with this Jane Doe before she turned 18, and Potter felt the need to address that. His quote said, this is from Gavin Potter directly, "I first met Jane Doe in October of 1991. She was 17. Our romantic relationship began around Christmas of 1991. I asked her around that time if she wanted to be my girlfriend. When she consented, only then did I kiss her, but we did not have sex. By the way, we did not, but there was no sex until marriage," says Potter. And then he notes, because it seems like that Jane Doe also was remarking, including in the abuse before the marriage, that there was also digital sexual abuse. And so Potter directly says allegations of digital penetration is untrue.
That's correct. So that is one of the allegations that Jane Doe made in her initial complaint, is that Gavin Potter digitally penetrated her while she was still a teenager, and this was before they were married. And Gavin Potter, in his sworn declaration, denies that allegation.
Right.
That's what Dodge is referring to there.
I also want to remark upon another point in which it appears that Gavin Potter may have shot himself in the foot when he was making this declaration, because as it is abuse, arguably, right? It doesn't merely have to be sexual abuse. It is abuse to arguably supply alcohol to a minor. So Gavin willingly says, this is in the mom's deposition, in her statement. She remarked how she had she wanted to say how she paid and provided for not one, but 2 weddings for her ungrateful daughter. But that most importantly, she got snacks and champagne, snacks and champagne for her daughter when her daughter was 18. Now you're drinking the champagne, you're in the same room as Gavin Potter, you're a minor drinking alcohol around this guy. So I would say, and maybe that's part of our job to blast some of this out, but that might be a really interesting nugget as this case progresses, which is most likely to go to trial probably in October. But fascinating little bit where they really, I mean, Scientology always trips over themselves, but this might be a big example that might become a major deal later on. Just my opinion, but.
I do see in your chat, Dusty asks, what is digital penetration?
Great question.
And trigger warning, because we are talking about, well, we're talking about SA here, and these are, but digital penetration meaning penetrating her with his fingers. That's what she has alleged took place before they were married, and that is the abuse that led to her.
Oh, I didn't know
reporting
what that meant. Okay,
yeah,
good to know.
Yeah, so that's the allegation.
That's even worse than anything online, or I think.
No, yeah, that's not
what he
what
meant
we
by
meant by
digital
digitally,
penetration.
no.
I thought we sent a picture or something.
No.
Okay,
That means
wow. So
using his
right.
fingers.
Okay, so that's the abuse you're talking about.
So that's what Jane Doe alleges. That's what Jane Doe reported to the church, and that's what led to them receiving the ultimatum of either get married or go to the RPF. And Gavin Potter, in his declaration, is denying that ever took place.
Right. Brian Kent makes an appearce. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, he didn't make an appearance. His name was brought up.
Makes an appearance.
His name was brought up in the in one of the motions that we looked at that was filed by the defense, in that the defense is looking to depose both Jane Doe as well as Brian Kent, if I understood correctly, in one of their motions for leave to conduct additional discovery. And did I make a note of that? Let me see if I did. So it's in support of, Defendant Church of Scientology International has a motion for leave to conduct discovery in support of motion to compel arbitration. And I don't know if I know all of the details there or quite how all of the dots fit together, but Brian Kent is an attorney whose name has come up in some scandals over the last year or so. He's represented a handful of plaintiffs who have been involved in suing the church, although some of his own actions have caused some delays and issues in some of those cases, to put it lightly and make it brief. But there was an indication from the defense that it looks like they may be interested in deposing Jane Doe as well as Brian Kent.
And they describe Brian Kent as the whole Brian Kent scandal.
I did see them use those words.
That way,
That's right.
Right. So the Child USA thing. I mean, so that's another thing too. When you talk about the actions of Brian Kent, you could see the reverberations, unfortunately, and you could see why there's been all this consternation against him, because Scientology now is trying to use his experiences and past as a way to try to weaken the case of their opponent. So you could see why internally in the anti-Scientology community, there was all this uproar about Brian Kent. Of course, it's because of what he did, obviously. But in addition to that, if you don't speak out, then he becomes a representative, and he's used as an example that Scientology will use to take down their opponent. So, it's good that people are fighting and highlighting this guy, just to remark that, hey, we're not on the side of Brian Kent. We don't endorse anything. And his participation in any of this is irrelevant. So, you can see why there's been so much opposition to him.
Indeed. Well, I'm trying to think if there is anything else notable about today. I see Emma Robson has a question. If they argue for deposition of anything, will it open them up too? We really want that. Well, yeah, if the plaintiffs make motions for leave to conduct additional discovery, and that discovery includes deposition of additional Scientologists, we would love to see that. I would love to see that. There's certainly a handful of individuals whose depositions we would love to see. Most of all, perhaps David Miscavige, although I have no doubt that he'll do everything that he can to avoid deposition at all costs.
Yeah, well put. And then I want to read some from the chat. I want to say also, just to go back to the additional attorney who has the experience with Jamie Spears and Britney. It's fascinating because it might give us a nugget as to how they'll approach the whole thing and what kind of attorney they want. And in that whole case, it was in an attempt to push the evidence, as much evidence as possible, of abuse against Britney to the side, and also very intentful in making Britney seem like the irrational person, saying that Britney has committed all of these actions where she just seems like she flew over the cuckoo's nest, and therefore she shouldn't be taken seriously. So there's something thematic. And then if you look at the statements in favor of Gavin Potter, they all try to indicate that this Jane Doe is a liar, that she shouldn't be trusted, that again, her mother paid for 2 weddings and gave her champagne and was so good to her, and that she abandoned her children, even though it looks like there might have been an effort to take her children too, and that was stopped, so she didn't really abandon them. So it's the same playbook, and it's paint the victim, it's paint the victim as somebody irresponsible and lacking of credibility. So you can see Scientology like always goes for the most vicious tactic, and it's never just here are the tangible details of the case, but it's here is why this person must be besmirched and must not be believed. So again, if you want to talk about this and generate some press, which I think we both certainly hope to do, we'll talk about these themes and talk about how Scientology has this reflexive habit of disempowering victims, and they hire attorneys who have experience in disempowering victims. So that's going to be a lot of good meat to chew on and blast out.
Totally. And one other thing I might even add on to that, as far as the parallels between what we see here and what we've seen in Britney Spears' conservatorship case, is in both cases we're seeing not only the victim blaming and discrediting of victims like Dodge was talking about, but also just twisting of the way that certain legal procedures are even supposed to operate. So we were seeing conservatorship abuse in the Britney Spears case,
yes.
And then in this case, and as well as other cases that have been filed by ex-Scientologists against the Church of Scientology, we're seeing abuse and twisting of the purpose of arbitration. So it's unsurprising that they're bringing on an attorney who specializes in that type of practice, or so that's just one thing that I wanted to throw on there about the fact that Alex Weingarten is now on this case as well.
Yes, yeah, so fascinating. I wanted to read some of the comments.
Me
There's
as
been
well.
A lot. We've got a lot of people in this chat, which is awesome.
Thanks all for coming in. Be sure to subscribe to Dodge Landisman if you are not already.
Yes, and subscribe to Jacob Harkey.
Thank you very
if you
much.
guys are not already. Dusty, I'm going to ignore your comment because this is more of appropriate stream, but give me a smile. Manzi me, abusive arbitration, exactly. That's it. Comment, interesting side note, says Irrelevant Panda. While digging online about Potter, I found a post from Tori Magoo. Warning, God, thank you for letting me know. I found a post from Tori Magoo warning people about him, Gavin Potter, in September 2007 on ARS.
Looks like 2000, yeah.
2000, that's what I meant.
ARS is alt-religion Scientology, and that was one of those early message boards before there was any such thing as SPTV or Going Clear or Leah Remini Scientology in the aftermath. ARS was one of those early message boards where some ex-Scientologists and critics would congregate to talk about Scientology and tell the truth. So I'll have to look out for that. That's interesting that Tori made a post about him back in 2000.
Max Smith asks, does Dodge work for publication? Just to answer your question, if you want to Google Dodge Landisman Scientology, I got fired from a mainstream local TV news station for talking about Lisa Marie Presley. Particularly, she was going to, despite being a Scientologist, she was going to testify against Danny Masterson. I got fired, even though the piece was truthful, because Scientology threatened to sue the station unless they fired me. So I kind of went on this crusade, and now I am independent, just like Zachary. Kidding. Anything else in your chat?
Anything else? I do see somebody else asking about any protester upcoming court dates. Did you mention that there was some stuff coming up this Friday?
Yes. So 2 for 1 day. We got Streets LA, and then of course the case with Solomon against the very gracious Zero Dark Tony.
All right.
Who's always been a gentleman in the truest sense of the word. So we'll try to. We might tag team that if they're going on the same time. If you're interested. But,
yeah, I'll have to double check my schedule for this Friday, see what my availability looks like.
But last time I was able to do both anyway, so it looks like I could probably do both.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, do I see anything else in my chat? It looks like those were the majority of the comments that I wanted to get to. But
yeah.
thank you to everybody who tuned in, and thank you to everybody who is watching on the replay crew. I appreciate you all for
Thank you guys.
tuning in and sticking around for the updates.
I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you guys for your support, and thank you for staying invested in this case. It's super important because, again, I think one of the main things that I want to look into is getting, as silly as they are, is getting the mainstream media to really blast out Scientology in a way they haven't done before. So if we make these interesting celebrity attorney connections and really, expose the details of how they cover up the abuse, I think there's a way to do that. And finally, 420 girl says, Dodge, do you clean your room? Never. Not going to happen. This shit all over the floor. Pardon my French. But that is all Z has in common with you. Independence. Yes, I was making the Zachary joke. Glad you are both teaming up on this. Lucky us. Yes. Well, thank you guys. And yeah, Jacob, anything else you want to add?
I think that'll about do it for today.
Well, all right. Thank you guys. And I will see you on Thursday. And again, subscribe to Jacob Harkey.
Subscribe to Dodge.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll
guys.
see ya. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Bye-bye.